A reading from the poet Stephen Dunn, a poem called 60, which he wrote approaching that age. Because in my family, the heart goes first, and hardly anybody makes it out of his 50s, I think I'll stay up at night with a few bandits of my choice and resist good advice. I'll invent a secret scroll lost by Egyptians and reveal its contents, the directions to your house, recipes for forgiveness. History says that my ventricles are stone alleys, my heart itself a city with a terrorist holed up in the mayor's office. I'm in the mood to punctuate only with that maker of promises, the colon. Next, 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 it says, God bless it. As Garcia Lorca may have written, some people forget to live as if a great arsenic lobster could fall on their heads at any moment. My 60th birthday is tomorrow. Come play poker with me. I want to be taken to the cleaners. I've had it with all stingy-hearted SOBs. A heart is to be spent. As for me, I'll share my mulcher with anyone who needs to mulch. It's time to give up search for the invisible. On the best of days, there's little more than the faintest intimations. The millennium, my dear, is sure to disappoint us. I think I'll keep on describing things to ensure that they really happened. Over the abyss. Last month, I asked my Ministerial Relations Committee what they would like to hear a sermon on, and one of them said, the fragility of life. Now, this could be about the fact that death takes us all in the end. It is a common experience in our lives here in this community. As we age, more and more of our friends drop away. We learn always, people we were talking to just yesterday or last week have passed to that land, as Hamlet says, from whose bourne no traveler has returned. We have in this church, of course, Jack Parsons. We had his memorial service last week. In my own life, Paul Baisley, who was the mainstay of the folk scene here in this part of the Cape, left us in July. Life is a terminal condition. I wonder if any of us ever make it out of it alive. Well, we don't. We were never meant to survive, as we just read. But it's not just in death that we see the fragility of our existence. There are events that happen to us to alter our lives completely. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And those times we're made to realize that while we think we've been standing on solid ground, we've actually been hovering over the abyss. It is as if the earth opens up underneath our feet. I'm also mindful in addressing the subject of the trauma that I'm about to inflict on myself and Jacqueline by moving to Lexington for 6 months, and the adjustments I and this congregation will have to make to live without each other during that time period of my sabbatical. And another factor impinging on us is that we're approaching Halloween. Halloween is based on Samhain, the Celtic New Year. The Celts had an idea that there was this ordinary world that we live in, and then there was the spirit world elsewhere where fairies lived, and they called that the sheath. The woman of the sheath is a bond, is the word for woman. Woman of the sheath is a banshee. You would have to cry for banshees at night. So in Halloween, the great Halloween epic is Tamlin, in which the spirits all erupt and ride through the town at midnight. That's what we have to look at from the Celtic point of view. But without resorting to the supernatural, ordinary reality often reveals the fragility of our existence. I will give you an example from my own biography. siblings. In the Eisenhower years, my father was a lawyer in a firm started by his father, and he practiced with his brother and sister. We had a suburban ranch home and a tract which my father's brother had developed and given to him. And he had left the Presbyterian church when he married my mother and became an enthusiastic convert to Episcopalianism. He actually, in his 30s, considered going into the ministry, but decided with a growing family he could not figure out how he could feed his children on what ministers made. So they raised us 5 children on a lawyer's comfortable income. We had a full life with school, neighborhood, home, church, extended family, vacations at the mountains and the beach, summer camp. But at the beginning of my senior year in high school, Dad had a stroke. He could no longer practice law, and that left the family somewhat at odds as to how it was going to stay afloat. He went to his brother, the senior partner, and pointed out that it was in his father's will that he would always be employed at that law firm. They had never heard of disability policies back then. So brother worked out a deal with it that they would pay him 10 years of compensation at the standard partner's rate, but he would not participate in the bonuses at the end of the year. So he got his draw for the next 10 years. I was just applying to colleges at that time. We had to apply for full scholarships. I was fortunate enough to get accepted at Yale, well endowed with scholarships, though I had to do a work job to get through. My family did not fall into the abyss. We went down a couple of notches on the lifestyle ladder. We kept our home, and I and my 2 younger siblings did get good college educations, and I cashed in some chips and went on to law school. But my mother did have to go back to school to get a master's degree and entered the workforce for the first time in her late 40s as a teacher of early childhood education. And those years were quite difficult. From his stroke, my father developed a bipolar personality disorder, which required us to civilly commit him several times. And when the 10-year agreement with the law firm had elapsed, they sold the family home to buy 2 units in a condominium development, downsizing further. And it was just after the closing on that deal at the bank, he asked if there was anything else he needed to sign, and the bank people told him no, and he went out and he committed suicide in order to leave my mother well off in the future with the life insurance that he would leave her. It's always been something that I've done in a mixed way. I admire him for his altruism and angry at him for the way he did it. But it also overshadowed my life in that I wanted to live my life to avoid his fate if possible. So I did not join the family law firm. They were conservative and I was liberal. In fact, I lived 100 miles away in Charleston, in Columbia. And I was a Unitarian Universalist, not an Episcopalian. I tried to watch my health, get regular heart checkups, exercise. And in my mid-40s, the age when he had had his stroke, I left the practice of law to train for the ministry. It was that decision, my decision, which engendered the large changes in my life, not something that happened to me, but something that I did. I was accepted in my first choice divinity school and was privileged to come to Boston, a city I dreamed about as a center of intellectual and cultural life. But at the same time, I paid a price I did not intend to pay, a price I would not have paid if I had known how stiff it was going to be going in, but which proceeded from the decision I made. That is to say, my first year at divinity school, my wife and I decided to sell the big old family house, and that set into motion a bunch of emotional things. Within 4 months, marriage had come apart. We do not need to go into details here. But the point is that my life did not end completely, absolutely, as my father's had at a parallel time, but it changed completely due to circumstance, due in part to decisions that I had made, and in part to circumstances beyond my control. Stephen Dunn says in his poem, quoting hypothetical words of the Spanish surrealist poet Federico Garcia Lorca, "Some people forget to live as if a great arsenic lobster could fall on their heads at any moment. My story might find echoes in your stories. My story may be small potatoes to the great wrenching transitions of your lives. Our history is made up of the choices we have made and the other things that happen to us, whether we want them or not, whether we're ready or not. Death, illness, the financial reversal, divorce, losing a job, the great arsenic lobster can fall at any moment. The fragility we know some by our common history. I first preached about the great arsenic lobster in Wakefield on October 7th, 2001, when we had just been through the national trauma of the most damaging terrorist attack in the history of the world up to that time. That was a time when we all felt suspended over the abyss and wondered what parts of our lives would be continued. The planes were grounded, phone communication was disrupted, and life in general felt like it had taken 3 giant steps backward. We lost a little innocence, and we know now that life in America changed forever because of that attack. Some of the changes, like the war in Iraq, Guantanamo, the growth of the surveillance state, and the drone wars, did not need to happen. But moving on from 9/11, in the ensuing decade, we've had other traumas where we've seen the abyss open up. Financial crisis of 2008 happened just as I was coming into this church. Many of you retired people told me that you had seen your nest eggs dwindle by 20 or 30%. Certainly a worrying problem. How are you going to live the rest of your days and what you have left? Totally outside of anyone's control. Even more recently than that, just this month, the debt ceiling showdown happening in Congress, where some committed people were willing to risk the full faith and credit of the United States and global economic tsunami to prove some political principle. That's the big public abysses that we face, where life as we know it is threatened, where things could change drastically in very short order. But fragility is a constant companion for some of us in our daily lives. There was an article in the Cape Cod Times yesterday morning about poverty on Cape Cod. You may have seen it. It was the lead story. There was a conference right up the hill in Orleans on poverty in Cape Cod. I'll give you a few quotes from that. "The face of poverty on the Cape is working parents who are 1 car repair away from not making their rent payment. That is to say, you can get by along fine unless your car needs repair, and then if you've got to cough up $300, that's going to put a total hole in the budget and you don't know where it's going. Another quote. "It's young people moving from foster care into homeless camps in the Hyannis area. Children who lack nutritious food in picturesque Chatham, and elderly women on the Outer Cape living in their cars." Well, I expect you sat up and took notice when the word Chatham came in. Can there actually be hungry people in Chatham? Yes, there was a food program here in the summertime for feeding children, hungry or no, or needy or no. They would put all the children together to feed them. This church, the Sunday school program, generally makes sure children get something to eat when they come to us. So there is need here. The elderly women on the Outer Cape living in their cars, that's another concern altogether. The article goes on to talk about older teens who age out of foster care, but then they have no place to go. One estimate says there are about 50 of these people living in the woods around Hyannis. That's people who are really living in the abyss. They don't have the safety net around them that we take for granted. Well, I was given this topic, and I must say that I had questions. What do I have useful to say about it? What is my opinion worth more than the guy who makes bar stool? You worry about these things. In general, you worry about the specifics in your own lives. But do I have anything useful to say? It seems to me there are some religious responses. What I can usefully tease out here, the religious responses to the fragility of life. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Calvinist guilt and quoted the famous sermon by Jonathan Edwards in the First Great Awakening, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, preached in Connecticut in 1741. Edwards has God very much dangling his audience over the abyss of hell. Quote, that world of misery, that lake of burning brimstone is extended abroad unto you. There is the dreadful pit of the glowing flames of the wrath of God. There is hell's gaping, wide mouth gaping open, and you have nothing to stand upon, nor anything to take hold of. There is nothing between you and hell but the air. It is only the power and mere pleasure of God that holds you up. End quote. Well, this Calvinist strain of theology would say that God not only plays dice with the universe, but plays it with our lives all the time. If something bad happens, God has caused it, and you'd better be on the good side of God. And the only thing you can do is go to church a lot, buy plenty of insurance, and never, ever take any risks. But I don't buy this, of course. This is what we grew out of. This is why we are Unitarian Universalists, because of the excesses of Calvinism. The God I can believe in, I think would act as least as good as the best person that I can imagine. And the best person that I can imagine, many of you would certainly fill the standards, if not most of you sitting here in this congregation, would not cause suffering and misery or misfortune to another person. The God that I would believe in would be the first person to weep when your mother dies, or you're laid off, or your child gets arrested. And hell is not some hot pit of brimstone in Middle Earth. It is a place we make for ourselves, and is largely made in our own minds. God does not dangle us over the pit. If we're dangling over the pit, largely we're doing it to ourselves. That's my default position, contrasted with Mr. Jonathan Edwards. But at the other end of the spectrum from Calvinism, we have Buddhism. The Buddha gave us his noble truths. And the first noble truth is dukkha is everywhere. What is dukkha, do you say? Dukkha is sometimes translated as suffering, so the first noble truth sometimes comes across as everything is suffering. But dukkha is best translated as unsatisfactoriness. Whether or not it's raining giant arsenic lobsters in your life right now, something is bound to be unsatisfactory, or worse. You can count on that. The pencils on your desk are not properly arranged. In this perspective, the big stuff like divorce, or loss of a loved one, or financial ruin is only a bigger example of dukkha, like parking tickets and flat tires, and Will Middlebrooks not getting out of the way of Alan Craig in the World Series. It's difference of degree, but not of kind. The second noble truth is that the root of dukkha is craving and clinging. The root of our unsatisfactoriness is our own craving and clinging. It comes in right here. Things are, by their nature, impermanent. If you enjoy your life where you live and your circle of friends and your church, that's fine. But no one guarantees they will last forever. In fact, the guarantee is quite in the opposite direction. They will change. The third noble truth is the way out is to let go. Let go of the craving and clinging. As you lose those things you have become accustomed to, realize that you have a choice to make. Make your happiness wrapped up in those things that you're losing, or somewhere else, stemming from more inside you, from stemming from what is going to remain. Myself and my own self, I would say during my first marriage, I could not imagine myself married to anyone else. And yet, when the divorce happened, I had to divest my happiness from being married to her and reinvest it in Jacqueline. And I've done it. The people who study happiness find that people who are inclined to be happy tend to adjust to life's blows and regain their happiness. They get thrown off for a while, but they generally bob back up and find a way to continue being happy despite reduced circumstances. In other words, our happiness does not depend so much on what actually happens to us as it does on how we react, how we deal with the things that happen to us. Humans are meaning-making animals. We have to understand the world around us. It's as much of an instinct of us to search for meaning as it is for that dog to go after that tennis ball. You know, you really can't help yourself. The dog can't help himself. And you can't help yourself from going after meaning. When there's a massive change, meaning drops away, or it has to be rearranged. We can become confused. But the confusion can generate creativity. It can generate new ways of looking at things. The blocks of meaning in our lives can realign. The catastrophe can sometimes lead to a new configuration that allows for growth. We will miss each other for 6 months while I'm on sabbatical. But you can also think about what this church is, where it's going, and we can come back together with some new ideas for ways that we can change this church. What do we do in the face of the fragility of life? In my book, we confront it frankly and embrace it. Not recklessly. We don't court disaster. Not indifferently. We care how it comes out, but deliberately. Remember why Thoreau said he went to Walden Pond. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. We can get excessively concerned with security. We can say, we can build our lives and direct our lives and make all of our choices to get security. But when you get security, you're locking yourself in, and it's the enemy of growth. In a world where our security is always and will always be at risk, you can take reasonable measures to reduce the risks that you can foresee. You can try to be realistic about those risks. There are 1,000 voices telling you that PCBs and GMOs and all nuclear power and whatever is going to be the damnation of all of us. And you have to sift that very carefully to see what really is a risk. But you have to accept at some point that there are always going to be factors beyond your control. At some point, the great arsenic lobster will fall out of the sun. And when that great arsenic lobster falls, you pick yourself up and see what's left. What are the growth possibilities from our new position? And this involves letting go is an essential spiritual discipline. One of the hardest things to let go of in all of this, in any kind of change, is our expectations. I certainly expected to spend all of my twilight years with my first wife, my high school sweetheart. And I had to let go of that. The hardest things are the things that you had thought you would always be doing. We cling tightly because we're afraid of dropping into that abyss. If I have to drop the idea of spending all of my Christmases with my wife, what's left of life? Well, you've got to recreate something else. It's a new phase of your life. You're introduced by the pain into a new phase of your life. I learned this with my father's death. I learned this with my divorce. Now, in the end, of course, there will come a time when we face death itself, and it's clear that death is holding all the cards. And that will be the time for the big letting go. I saw Jack get to that point. I think my friend Paul got to that point. Not everyone does, because some people die suddenly without any chance for reflection. But for me, I hope that I continue the dance of life as long as the music is playing, whatever that music may be, until the last coda. All very well and good, you're saying, for the Pollyannas, but these things are heavy. It's not easy to confront these things, to embrace them. What gives us the strength to realign our meanings? What gives us the strength to see the glass as half full? What gives us the strength to be grateful for what is left to us on our journey? I think what gives us that strength is love. It's the power of love. It's love for the continuation of the human species, and for whatever part is left to you in that story. To feel your connection with everyone around you and with the big story that you have been a part of. It's up and down. In Joni Mitchell's great song, we've looked at life on both sides now. Up and down. If love is stronger than death, love is stronger than the great arsenic lobster of fate, or whatever fate can throw at you. Stephen Dunn says in his poem, a heart is to be spent. A heart is to be spent. It's not to be hoarded. It's to be spent. In the end, when death is holding all those cards, we let go of life, but in letting go of life, we never let go of love. Or in the words of the readings we did earlier, we were never meant to survive. But while we live, vulnerable, we venture our lives courageously toward light and hope, and once fragile and rooted. Amen. Now let there be